Hi, welcome to HouseFlippingSpreadsheet.com. You're watching a quick video tutorial on the basics of the expense tracker and how it can be used to track expenses for your rehab projects. The expense tracker is similar to QuickBooks or any other accounting software in which you will input an expense item for each individual expense on the project. The basic process for inputting expenses is to describe what goods or services were provided, how it was paid for, where it was paid from, and who it was paid to. Let's walk through each step for inputting expenses into the expense tracker. Before you start inputting expenses, you will need to make sure you have set up your chart of accounts and your vendor accounts under Accounting Setup. The first step in the expense tracker is to input a description or memo describing the expense and the goods or services provided. You will then select a payment type, which is the type of payment used to pay the vendor, such as a check, credit card, debit card, cash, or bank transfer. There are 4 expense categories that provide powerful data analysis tools that analyze, categorize, and report your project expenses. These expense categories are expense account, vendor accounts, expense type, and expense class. The first expense category is the expense account, which is the account used to pay a vendor for goods or services provided. The expense account could be a bank account, a credit card account, or even an employee expense reimbursement account. Now remember, the expense accounts on the drop-down menu are set up in the chart of accounts using Account Setup. Selecting an expense account is an important step, because the expense tracker will use the account information to total expenses by each individual account, which will ultimately be reported by the Expenses by Account report. The next item is the vendor name, which is the name of the vendor who is being paid for the goods or services provided. The vendor name options that you find on the drop-down menu are set up using the Vendor Account Setup. Just like the expense accounts, selecting a vendor name is very important because the expense tracker will use the vendor information to total the expenses for each vendor, which will ultimately be reported on the Expenses by Vendor report. The next expense category is the expense type, which is broken down into 3 major expenses. The expense type can be the purchase price, which is the amount paid to purchase the property. The expense type can also be fixed costs, such as buying, holding, and selling costs. Or the expense type can be classified by one of the 24 repair scopes of work, such as demolition, drywall, or painting. These expense type categories are the most important and crucial expense categories, because this data will be used to classify and total the expenses by the purchase costs, fixed costs, and repair costs at the top of the expense tracker, and also utilized on the repair cost forecaster. This expense type information will also be used by the expense summary report, expense by scope report, financial projections report, and final profit statement to break down the costs by each expense type and repair scope of work. The final expense category is expense class. Expense class is categorized by labor costs, material costs, and subcontracted costs. The expense class information will be used to track and report your expenses by labor, material, and subcontracted costs. Once you've filled in the description of the expense, how it was paid, what account it was paid from, who it was paid to, and filled in the appropriate expense categories, you can then input the quantity and cost information. The total expense cost for each item is calculated by multiplying the quantity by the unit cost. The total expenses for the project are then totaled at the top of the expense tracker and categorized based upon the expense category selected. This expense cost information is then utilized to create professional, printer-friendly expense reports that can be used to manage budgets, track expenses, and forecast project profitability. We thank you for watching our quick video tutorial on the basics of the expense tracker. If you have any additional questions, feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call. We appreciate your time and business and wish you the best of luck.